It's story time, stories from the stage in this episode of Road Noise Life, 1 mile at a time. Hello again and welcome to another episode of Road Noise Life, 1 mile at a time. Episode number 48, Stories from the Stage. I'm Michael Blackston, your host, and you're sitting alongside me in the passenger seat as I commute to Birmingham, Alabama this morning. If you're hearing the rumble of something under my voice, it's just the sound of the road, hence the reason I call it road noise. And I'm kind of in a good mood this morning. I've had some interesting ideas to come my way, things and more projects that I want to be involved with, and it's kind of gotten me a little bit excited. So when I was thinking, what do I want to talk about in this episode, I actually came up with several topics, another series I'd like to do for future episodes, but today I want to just tell you stories. You know, lately I've kind of tried to do something that was a little helpful to you, and that's great, and that's kind of the direction I want to stick with for the most part, but I want to stay interesting too, and people like stories. People like to hear things that have happened to other people. That's why reality TV is so popular. They like to get into what's happened in other people's lives. So I thought, because, and you'll learn later when I talk about my week, why I'm kind of in a theater mode. My theatrical love is just right out in front of me right now. And so that's what I want to talk about today. And I decided I'm just going to tell you some stories from my history, anywhere from when I was a kid all the way up to very recently. So I wonder, have you ever done stage work? You might have heard the episode before when I talked about the benefits of theater. I was episode 20-something, and I want to say maybe 23. Somewhere in that ballpark. So you know that, having listened to this show, if you have before, I probably mentioned my love for the theater. And I've spent my entire life doing it just about. I'm over 40 years old. I'm 43 at this recording. And I started doing work on a stage of some sort when I was 5 years old. From small little community things all the way to some kind of, I wouldn't say regional, but some bigger theaters, you know, a few miles from the house. I've done some theater in front of some fairly large audiences and stuff before. And one thing about theater that people never notice, I mean, you go to the show and you hear the orchestra. If it's a musical, you hear the orchestra warming up, you read the playbill, the program, you get the experience, you see the show, you maybe even get to meet the actors after the show, and for a spectator, that is pretty much it. That's where it ends. But there's so much that goes on behind the scenes. I really could spend hours talking about all the different things that have happened to me behind the scenes. The first one I want to talk about is opening night of Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. It's a musical written by Andrew Lloyd Webber, lyrics by Tim Rice. That show was originally written as about a 45-minute kind of rock opera cantata for, I want to say it may have been written for Andrew's brother Julian's church program. I don't know. It was something. You have to look at the history of it. I'm not going to go into all of the history of everything. But anyway, it was written by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice. If you recognize the name Andrew Lloyd Webber, he's also the creative genius behind The Phantom of the Opera, Evita, Sunset Boulevard, Cats, which is about to go back on Broadway if it hasn't already. So, we were doing Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. We had already performed that show in Greenville, South Carolina, and I played Benjamin. My wife played, one of the wives. We had secondary roles, but we fell in love with, we went to Greenville to audition for that show and got those roles and did the show because of our love for the soundtrack, which we already knew by heart. We loved it so much, and we enjoyed doing the show in Greenville so much that we put our names in the hat in a local theater to direct Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, a version of it on our own. Well, we had auditions, and nobody came to auditions that could handle the narrator or Joseph's role. So my wife and I, co-directing this show, also had no choice but to put ourselves in the lead roles, because it wasn't a matter of finding somebody that would work. There was nobody that could handle the vocal capabilities of those roles. This was a very small town, and there were a couple of parts that we had to cast where we had to call people and beg them to come be a part of the show. So the roles of Joseph and narrator went to me and my wife. So it was a big task to take on for us to direct this show. I mean, it was very stressful. We handled everything because I'm an artist and because I like to have my hands in too much of what I do. I took on the responsibility not only of being a co-director, being Joseph, but I also took on the responsibility of building, painting the set. I did have a crew helping me. A lot of my family members helped me with that set, and they put it together with me, but I kind of was the artistic director for that, responsible for the set and everything. So it was a very stressful time. Joseph is a show that is music all the way through. There's only 2 or 3 spoken words in the entire production. It is a little bit shorter production than a normal one, but not by all that much, especially when you add the curtain call, which is a reprise of all the music in a rock and roll form called the Mega Mix. So we had a lot on our plates with that. Well, it came down to time to open the show. It was opening night, and we opened, I want to say, I'm not sure what month it was. My mind wants to go to June, but I'm still not sure. I'm not even sure of the year, much less the month, but I want to say it was somewhere around June. And we had the storm come up right as the cast was getting into the theater to perform the show. Usually you get there a couple of hours before you open the door, and then you've got about 30 minutes from the time you open the door and let the patrons in to the time the show starts. So it was about 2.5 hours before the show was actually to begin. In a small town, when there's bad weather, whether it's snow or storms or anything like that, it can seriously have a negative effect on the people that will come. A lot of times they'll say, well, I'll just sit this one out, I'll go tomorrow, or I'll reschedule. I don't want to get out in this messy weather. And we were afraid when the storm came over 2.5 hours before the show was about to start that it was going to seriously negatively affect our opening night crowd. Well, not only was I worried about that, but it got tornadic. It developed from a thunderstorm into a severe thunderstorm directly over the town, right on top of where we were going to be. It started raining, and then it started raining heavily, and then it got very windy. I mean, these really strong bursts of wind bending the trees over, gale force winds, heavy downpour rainfall, what we call in the South a gully washer. I was disheartened. My wife got out of the car, and the wind was so bad it knocked her on her butt. She got out of the car, and a gust hit her, and she lost her footing and fell down. Then we get into the theater, and we were all downstairs getting our makeup on, getting into costume, getting our voices prepared for the show. I was nervous as I could be. As the director, I was also upstairs trying to make sure that sound and everything was right, doing sound checks with our microphones, everything that goes along with not only being the director of a show, but also being an actor in the show. Very stressful time. I was just on pins and needles. I didn't know how many people were going to show. My stage manager comes up to me and says, Michael, we have a huge problem. She took me to stage right, just to give you an explanation of stage right and stage left, so if I mention it in future stories, you'll know. Stage right and stage left are your right and left, the wings from your right and your left, as you're looking out into the audience from the stage. So you can imagine you're an actor on the stage and you're looking out into the audience delivering something. To your right in the wings is stage right. Well, anything to your right from center is stage right, and anything to the left of center is stage left. So she took me to the wings at stage right. The storm is pouring rain, and the storm is pouring rain into our theater at stage right. The wings are soaked. I mean, absolutely soaked. Luckily, Nothing messed with any props. No props or set pieces got wet or damaged, but it was absolutely soaked. And this was a show this was a small stage, and we were putting almost 40 people in the wings and on the stage at any given moment. It was going to be crowded the whole time. We could not have that wet area back there. So we started finding all the towels. I think we probably even used some costume pieces that would soak up water. Costume pieces from downstairs that we weren't using. Anything we could find that would soak up water and get stage right, presentable, and nobody was going to slip up and fall, because people were running in and out of the stage area, into the wings, out of the wings. It was a very active show. I couldn't have that. And I absolutely was at the limits of my nerves at this point. But we managed to get it mopped up and get it all dry, and the storm abated, and then it was time to wait and see what happened. And what happened was a sold-out show. People came anyway. We sold out just about every night. It's a small theater, but we sold it out every night, and it was, to this day, one of the most popular and one of the most well-received shows that theater's ever done. So that was a harrowing experience, and it's the type of thing that will make you say, why in the world do I do this? Why do I put myself through it? And it's the love of theater. It's just, you think after you've directed, and more after you've directed than after you've performed, but sometimes after you've performed a difficult show, you think, I've got to take a break. I've got to not do this for a while because it's so taxing. But for someone like me who's a stage hound, I call myself a stager, I just can't get enough of it, and within just a matter of days, I'm ready for the next project. The toll it can take on a person has never been more evident than my turn as Professor Harold Hill in the musical The Music Man at Encore Theater Productions of Music Man at the Elbert Theater. That show was done at a time of year where people were getting sick. I want to say it was right after Christmas or something. I think it was a winter show. I can't quite remember. I've done so many shows, the actual performance dates get so muddy in my mind, but I know that people were getting sick. Also, the Elbert Theater is an old theater. It's been around for a long time. It's been any number of things. In fact, right before Encore took it over and started rebuilding it, it was completely dilapidated. They went from just about a shell to this beautiful, nice theater, which now shows not only plays but first-run movies. And because of a lot of old structure around there, you have to deal with some mold. And I theorize that mold played a part in what happened to me during The Music Man. Mold combined with pure vocal exhaustion. Professor Harold Hill is the lead character of The Music Man. He is The Music Man, and it's always been one of my dream roles. And I got the opportunity to play. I auditioned and got the role as Harold Hill. And we went through the production. It was going well. I had my notes. I had my lines down. That wasn't the issue. If you've ever done theater before, you know the most stressful time of the production is, or one of the most stressful times, is the week before you open. And we really knocked out some hard, heavy rehearsals in dress rehearsal week. Opening week is just, you work out your last kinks. You work those scenes over and over again. You sing those songs over and over again, and you really work your voice. And it's very important that you try to keep your voice. You don't talk much. You don't sing much unless you're at rehearsal. You pamper your voice if you've got a heavy singing role during those times, because what happened to me can happen. The opening week was great. It was no problems. Vocally, I was strong. Then we came up to the second week, the second weekend. Friday night, I started feeling a little overwhelmed with my voice. It was starting to feel tired. I was tight in my chest. My vocal cords just didn't seem as strong. However, when Friday night happened and we opened, there was just a magic about it. My voice was the best it had ever been. Yes, I still felt those things, but I still had the strength and the control that I had my best night vocally the second Friday night of the show. However, immediately after that show was over, I started feeling worse and worse, and I woke up Saturday morning feeling awful. And when I tried to sing or when I tried to talk, the strength was no longer there. I didn't have it. My voice was going. So Saturday night, I performed that show the best way I could without much voice. Enough strength to get through it, but without much voice. I was even having to kind of alter the way I was singing a little bit to make it sound like it was supposed to be that way. I had hoped it would get better, but alas, Sunday, matinee performance, the final production or final performance of The Music Man, I almost had no voice by the time the show opened. I mean, I was pretty much like this. I was living on hot tea and cough drops, and they would help for a moment. They would give me a little bit of elasticity in my voice for a moment. But by the time the scene was over, I was back to almost no voice. And I'm singing these songs, and it got worse and worse as the show went on, to the point that I was having to I was altering my voice, like I told you. I had to alter it on that last show, and I was almost singing like Neil Diamond. If you know who I'm talking about with Neil Diamond, you remember I Am, I Said, and so, that's about all I could do, with apologies to Neil Diamond. That's not making fun of him. I really like his music and his voice, but it's not anywhere in the ballpark of what my voice is. That still sounds like I'm insulting him. I'm not saying I'm better than Neil Diamond. I'm saying we are that much different in our vocal styles. But I had to adapt to that because I had no voice, so I had to push out as much as I could. It's a tenor role. I couldn't get anywhere up there. And so I had to finish this entire show basically doing an impersonation of Neil Diamond, because it was the only thing that I could make my voice do that sounded halfway like it was supposed to be that way. And everybody who saw that particular performance, or any of the cast in there, will tell you they were all in the wings. They were just feeling so sorry for me. They were praying for me. As we got up to the last note of the last song, my voice gave out. I held out that note, got it out, and that was it. And I had no voice to sing with. I could talk. After I healed from that initially, I could talk. But vocally singing, it was 6 months before I could sing another note. My voice just wouldn't do it. I could sound like I was talking fine, but if I tried to sing, it wouldn't come out. It just completely stopped. For 6 months, I had to rehabilitate my voice, and it was harrowing for me because I have always sang. That's my thing. That's my jam. That's me. I'm a singer. And it was very, very rough on me. And I want to do that role again. I want to do Harold Hill again. I want one more opportunity to do that role so that I can redeem myself and have a full run at full voice. And because I think it affected my acting as well. I was so worried about my voice singing and that it was weak with talking. Even though I was mic'd, I didn't have to worry about projecting too much. I could tell them, you're going to have to ride that microphone. You're going to have to ride the gain on it so that I can be heard because my voice is not strong. I did have that kind of handicap there. But when your voice won't sing, there's nothing the mic techs can do. So I was so worried about that it really bothered me during that show, and I want another opportunity. I had another scare very recently when we did the run of Mr. Long Said Nothing. That's the play that I wrote, and I was given the opportunity to direct. Had a small part in it that I had to fill, and I didn't bother to cast anybody else because it was such a small role. I really didn't want to make someone have to be at all the rehearsals just for 5 or 6 lines. And so I just took on that role, And that really didn't bother me too much, having to do that and direct at the same time, because for the most part I was able to run around the side of the theater, out the stage door, around the side of the theater and to the front to sit or stand and pace in the sound booth as the rest of the show was going on, when I wasn't on stage doing that role, which was only a couple of scenes. So we had the run of Mr. Long Said Nothing. It was an exciting time for me, but it called for some special effects, some pretty difficult special effects, especially for a small theater stage. We had to take a man and within the space of 5 minutes change him from one character to another. And the other character we had to change from, because you may say, well, that's not too bad. You throw on a different costume, you throw on maybe a wig or something, they look like a different person. No, he had to be the identical image of a statue that we had on stage all through Act 1 that this actor acted in front of. We had to remove the statue and put him on the base of the statue because he was to come alive. And it was important that the same actor play that role. Psychologically, technically, you could get away with having it be different actors, and I'm sure if I ever sell the play, I will probably make that an option. But to do it the way I, as the writer, envisioned it, and for the poignancy of it to come out, it's really important, I think, to have the same actor play James, Katie's father, and the statue that is so prominent in the show and all of their lives. So within the space of about 5 minutes, he goes off stage, has his last scene, and then he had to run downstairs where we were waiting. My sister was his personal artist for this. We had mixed up special liquid face paint that we bought for specifically this purpose, for theatrical spraying on an actor, and an airbrush. We had to mix it to a specific consistency every night and have him run down there. He had to change into his costume, and then he had to be rushed downstairs, and my sister had to airbrush his entire head and hands and get him the exact color of everything so it matched. It worked like a charm every single night. It was always a quick thing, but if you did it right and you timed it right and everything went right, he had enough time to get up to stage right from downstairs over to a little fan we had on the side where he would just place his face in front of the fan so it would dry the makeup, because he has a bowler hat that the statue has to take on and off, and we didn't want his regular skin tone coming through as it got rubbed from the bowler hat. We needed that makeup to be dry, so he would have to stand by that fan and get up on stage, and we usually had enough time. 5 minutes was usually plenty of time. However, on the last performance, the Sunday afternoon performance, again, just like Music Man, the very last performance, he goes off stage. He does his off-stage dialogue while he's getting into his costume. Because that was another thing. He had dialogue he was having to stay off stage that the audience heard, and he would always be performing that dialogue as he was getting into his costume for the statue of Mr. Long. So he did that, and he ran downstairs, and my sister went to spray, and there was nothing coming out. It was clogged, and it was my fault, because I was the one that was in charge of mixing the paint before we got started and testing it every day, and I thought I had tested it. I'm sure I had tested it, but something had happened. I had just mixed it just barely too thickly for it to come out of the sprayer of the airbrush. So I had to run, take the makeup from her. She had to be forcing water through it and spraying water through it to make sure that she cleared out any gunkiness that was in there while I was thinning the makeup, while all this is going on, and we've only got 5 minutes from the time he went off the stage to the time the curtain opened on him being the statue. So we were in a rush, and we barely got it done. There's actually a video of this called From James to Mr. Long in Minutes, and it is on my Everything Arts YouTube page. So if you go to the YouTube page with Everything Arts, you can hear me singing some songs, but you can also see by the way, the full production of the first run of Mr. Long Said Nothing. You get to see the entire show if you'd like to. You can see a little 8-minute montage of people from the play and one or two, I think, that weren't in the play that saw it that really loved it. They did a little thing for me, an appreciation, the cast did. And you can see that with clips of the show. But you can also see this James to Mr. Long in minutes where they videoed this whole thing going down, because I had said that I wanted to have a video of David Bennett, who is the actor that played Mr. Long, being transformed from James to Mr. Long. Well, it happened to be that they videoed it during that time. So you see me in there going, what's going on? And then running over there and mixing the paint and then coming back, and the actor just kind of standing there like, oh boy, what are we going to do? And then it shows him from the time he walks off stage, getting in his costume, running his lines, getting down there, getting ready to be sprayed, the spray clogging, us fixing it, getting him done, and then running up the other side of the stairs and sticking his head into the at the fan just as quickly as he can, and then him getting up on the pedestal. And I mean, it's just a few seconds from the time he steps up on the pedestal and gets set that the curtain starts opening. It was crazy that day, and I was freaking because I wrote this show, and I wrote it to be a tight transition, but to be plenty of time, but I didn't really take into consideration that things might get clogged. So I have since then kind of worked out that time frame and elongated the scene a little bit so that there's a little bit more dialogue. But if I ever sell that show, I'm going to always make sure that I put in the notation to whoever is putting it on to make sure, if you're doing a spray and you're doing a separate person that has to make this change and you're doing some sort of spray, make sure that everything is ready to go and thin enough before you start doing it, or you could run into an issue. So that was Mr. Long getting clogged there right before intermission. My wife has a funny story. When she was doing, or when we were doing The King and I, back at that same small theater where I was telling you about doing Joseph, she was playing the role of Tup Tim, who is a Siamese slave girl, because The King of I is about, The King and I is about the King of Siam entertaining an American woman to come over, and I think she's supposed to teach his son. I think she's his son's teacher, and they fall in love. And Yul Brynner played the king in the TV movie, or not TV movie, but in the original movie. And I think Julie Andrews may have played the female role in the movie. I think she and Yul Brynner, I think, played it on Broadway. Anyway, the Siamese slave girl that my wife played, Tup Tim, there's a scene where she is brought in and accused of being a spy. And she's brought in before the king, and she's made to kneel down, and her line is, "I am not a spy." Well, as I told you, the wings in this little small theater we were working in are so shallow that, I mean, if you're right there behind the tape, behind the sight lines where the audience can't see you in the wings, you're right close to the prop tables and all that stuff. And we had this shelf that had cardboard swords. They had made swords out of cardboard, and my wife was wearing this long kind of, it didn't look it from the stage, but it was kind of that, it was like a Halloween wig, long black Halloween wig, and you know the material they use for that is just kind of wiry and spidery. She had backed up while she was waiting for her entrance and backed up against the shelf where the swords were, and one of the cardboard swords stuck in her hair. It stuck in the back of her hair. So it was so light, she didn't realize it was there. So her cue came, and she was ushered onto the stage, and she was forced to kneel in front of the king, and the king didn't know what was going on. Her back was away from him. He was facing her. Her back was to the audience. She was forced to kneel, and she's got this sword stuck in her hair. And her line is, "I am not a spy." And the audience went wild laughing. And the king had no idea why the audience was laughing. That's not a place. In fact, the audience had learned to love Tup Tim and her love interest Loon Ta, and it was one of those relationships that was not supposed to be, and they were having to sneak around, and the audience loved them and felt for them. And then here she is being brought before the king, and he's accusing her of being a spy. It's not supposed to be a funny scene, yet she's got this cardboard sword stuck in her hair as she says, "I'm not a spy." And so it was funny watching that go down, because she had no idea. She didn't know it was there. It didn't throw her, and it really didn't throw the king, because they really didn't know what was going on. All they knew was that something was happening that was making the audience go wild with laughter in a really unusual place in the script. And that's one of my wife's favorite stories, is the cardboard in her hair when she tells the king, "I am not a spy." The last two stories I want to tell you, because I'm already getting late into the podcast episode, is another story about Mr. Long. And it was a really neat, it's not during the show, but it is just a little after effect, really a before effect, that was exciting for me. I finished writing the play, and it was the first thing I had ever written that I'd completed. And so it holds a special place in my heart, always will, for being the first literary work I ever completed. To get to have a public reading of it was that much more exciting, and then to find out I was going to get to see a full show run and direct it was even that much more exciting. But I wasn't expecting the day that I drove by the theater and looked up at the marquee, and it said, "Michael Blackston's Mr. Long Said Nothing." I didn't dream I would have my name up in the lights. You hear that all the time. You want your name up in lights. I never dreamed I was going to ever get that. And it's not something that was on my radar with this. I was just honored that they were letting me do it. But when I drove up and I saw Michael Blackston's Mr. Long Said Nothing, I mean, it brought me to tears. I couldn't believe it. That's something so many people long for and never get to see. And that moment when I got to see that just for the first time, it has impacted me so much and has stuck in my memory, and it's such a valued part of my life, just to know that I've had the opportunity to have that. My grandma told me when she found out about it, I took pictures and I showed people, and they rode by and they saw it, and my grandma said, "Your grandpa would be so proud. You just have no idea how proud he would have been to say, 'That's my grandson.'" He was gone by then. And I hate that, because I really think he would have liked Mr. Long. And the last thing is another kind of touching one. My very first real big stage show was Oliver at the Anderson Community Theater in Anderson, South Carolina, and I was just that close to being able to play the lead in the role of Oliver. First, I was a little bit young, but from the way my mom tells it, the director really wanted me to play Oliver. I had the look, I had the voice for the singing. The problem was I was so shy, I had never done a show before, so when we read, I was not projecting enough. I wouldn't read loud enough. And he tried everything he could to get me to the point where he would feel comfortable directing me to read the lines and to say the lines right. But I just would not project my voice enough. And at this time, they did not have an audio system. They weren't going to be wearing microphones, and it's a rather large theater, which means the actors were going to have to not only speak loudly, they were going to really have to project their voices. And this was an orchestra piece as well. There would be a live orchestra, and we'd have to project over that. So he knew he really had no wiggle room to play with me there. He couldn't say, "Well, we can ride the mics." It wasn't going to work. So I didn't get to play Oliver, but I was a member of Fagin's gang, and I remember really liking the guy who played Fagin. If you're not familiar with the story of Oliver, and most people are, it's the musical version of Oliver Twist from Charles Dickens, and Fagin is the lovable but baddie. Yeah, the lovable baddie. You kind of feel for him, you like him. He's a little bit of a comical character. He's the guy that takes in the orphan children off the streets and makes them go be pickpockets, and they bring all the stuff back to him. And he's kind of a lackey for Bill Sykes, who is the really evil bad guy in the show. So Fagin is an old guy. He's kind of washed up. He's scruffy and dirty, but lovable. And I remember loving the guy that played him. He just brought that character to life, and I was a member of his gang. I was one of Fagin's gang. My very first big show. So it's always held a special place for me. Recently, several years ago, I shouldn't say recently because it's been several years ago now, my son, probably 3 or 4 years ago, my son auditioned for a role in Oliver at the Elbert Theater, and I thought it was great. And he didn't really he wanted to be one of Fagin's gang. I think he wanted to do that because that's what his daddy had done. And he was young. He was not really, he'd done some theater camp shows, but he'd never done anything on the main stage other than a couple of little things, small roles. This was the title role of the show. And he was a little bit young, but he auditioned, and the director called me up one day and said, "Michael, I really want Noah to play Oliver." And I asked him then, I said, "Are you sure he's ready? Are you sure you want someone that young?" Oliver's supposed to be about 11 or 12 years old. Noah was, I want to say 8 or 9. He said, he said, "As long as you think he can do it, and I want you to ask him if he'd be willing to do it, because I know he was wanting to be one of Fagin's gang. Go ahead and ask him if he's willing to do it. And if he is, I want to put him as Oliver." So I asked him, and Noah said, "Sure, I'll do it." And then he told me, "I want you to play Fagin." I didn't even audition, but he wanted me to play Fagin. He said, "Michael, I think you'd be perfect. You can do characters, you can do the accent, you can artistically make yourself up to look the role. So I really would like you to play Fagin, and that would be neat to have you as Fagin and your son as Oliver." He has no idea, or he might now, but he didn't at the time, what an honor that was for me to get to play alongside my son in a show that was my very first show that I ever did in this genre that is so near and dear to me. I got to play Fagin to my son's Oliver, and it was an emotional time. When my son first started doing the little sweet song that Oliver is known for, "Where Is Love," that very first night when he laid there on the coffin, as it calls for the character to do, and sings "Where Is Love," I was an emotional mess. I had to make sure, and I knew I was going to be, I had to make sure that I had provisions there to fix my makeup, because I had to wear heavy stage makeup to age myself to about in my 70s and be scruffy, and I was wearing a beard, and I was afraid my makeup was going to get messed up, so I had to be prepared for that. But that was one of the best times of my life, being able to play the role of Fagin opposite of my son. So there's a few stories. I hope you enjoyed them, and I hope maybe they encouraged you to look into theater for yourself. There are so many stories from backstage that I could tell you that I could go on and on and on. I could go into detail and shenanigans that are played and the family that it creates. Theater is such a wonderful, wonderful thing to have in your life, and I highly suggest that you consider making it a part of your life at least once. If you've never done it before and you always wanted to, do one show. You may find that you want to do the rest of the shows, or you may find that that's not for you, that was too much work. I also urge you to get your kids involved with drama and theater. The arts is so needed in our society, and it's so overlooked now and thrown to the wayside. It's looked at as unimportant now, especially behind the other things in our schools like sports, and they'll throw all kinds of money at sports when really, yeah, sports do have their good things, team building and leadership and stuff like that. I understand that. Sports is important. I'm not throwing that away. But I believe the arts is just as important, and yet it is being forgotten. And so I want to encourage you to get your children involved with the arts, whether it's visual arts or theater arts, whatever. Your local community theater can tell you all about that. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that in today's positive review coming up in just a little bit. But I do want to quickly get into my week. What got me into this theatrical mode is last night I went on my first consultation, I guess is what I would call it, with the one-act drama group at our high school. The very first show that they did a few years ago when they were bringing the one-act program back to life was an adaptation of Mr. Long Said Nothing. The director of the one-act program is a teacher at the high school, and she was one of the main characters in my show. She originated one of the characters. She originated Murda in Mr. Long Said Nothing, and she loved the show so much. By the way, her oldest daughter, played the lead of Katie, and her youngest daughter played younger Katie, so they both originated those roles. Fell in love with the show, asked me to adapt it for one act because she thought it would be a powerful, good one to start. And it was. People were crying at the end of the performance. They didn't place, but they had a lot to learn, and it was just one of those things, trial and error, and they're just getting better and better. But now they're doing a show called A Prayer for Mary Catherine. It takes place at a Catholic high school, and it's a very poignant piece. And they've asked me to come in and consult with the actors and just sit in on a rehearsal or two once or twice a week and give my thoughts on it. And I'm feeling very honored for that. And just doing that last night, I had such a great time that I've gotten excited about theater again. It's just on the top of my mind. And I started thinking, I have known for a while, because what I do is I'll write a script, then something else, then a script, then something else. Right now I'm novelizing Mr. Long Said Nothing. And it'll be a little while before I'm done with it. But when I get done with that, I want to go ahead and write another script. We're putting on my show, Friends Like You, in the summer of 2017 at the theater. I'm honored that they're going to allow me to produce another show. I won't be directing that, but somebody else will. So the next script I want to write is a one-act. I want to write something that I think could be competitive. I felt like Mr. Long necessarily didn't adapt well to one act, so I want to write something specifically for it, and I've come up with an idea for it that I'm calling either Peaches or Summer Peaches or something like that. And I'm just excited for that. So that's really kind of what's been on my mind for the week, other than just living life the best I can. And finally, I want to go ahead and give local theater my positive review. It's nothing specific. It's not a specific local theater at all, but it is the positive review because it is a positive thing. If you don't want to be a part of the local theater, as far as being a part of the productions on crew or on stage, you don't want to get your kids involved, okay, fine. But I do want to encourage you to at least visit your local theater. Go see the shows. Become a patron. Give your county and your arts in your community some of your money. And it's worth it. It's a fun, entertaining way to go see something different. Some classics, some new stuff, whatever they're doing, musicals. Those guys put a lot of hard work into it. The directors, the cast, the crew, everybody involved. The work is so intense, and they put so much of their heart, soul, blood, sweat, and tears. Literally, blood, sweat, and tears go into every one of these shows. Give them your support. So my positive review is your local theater. It doesn't have to be regional. It doesn't have to be Broadway. Go see a show that your neighbor down the road is a part of. They'll appreciate it. They'll be glad to see you, and you'll be glad you did. So that's it for this episode of Road Noise, episode 48. Theater stories, or stories of the stage, I think is what I was calling it. If you've got anything you'd like to add, I'd love to hear your story of the stage. If you're a theater hound, give me a call on the voicemail line at 706-408-7456, or you can give me some feedback via email at feedback@michaelblackston.com. You can also go straight and stream the podcast from the roadnoisepodcast.com site. That's where you go, roadnoisepodcast.com. And from there, you can also go to iTunes and give me a review, share me on the social media buttons, and all that good stuff. So until next week's episode, thank you for sitting alongside me in the passenger seat on the way to Birmingham, Alabama, as we learn to live life 1 mile at a time. I'm Michael Blackston. We'll see you next time.